Hi guys, welcome back to Christy's Book Corner. I'm your host, Christy Mason, and we're going to continue with Inkheart by Cornelia Funk. Inkheart. Okay, and because these chapters are short, we're going to combine them into one video. So this is chapter 7 and chapter 28, chapter 27 and 28. I don't know why I say 7. Maybe because 7 and 8 were short. Okay. Chapter 27, A Good Place to Stay. They did not set off to join Eleanor at Justfinger's. Justfinger had left them. Maggie, I know I said we would, said Mo, as they stood in the square in front of the war memorial, feeling rather at loss, but I'd like to leave the journey until tomorrow. As I told you before, there's nothing else I'd have to discuss. There's something else I have to discuss with Fenagolo. The old man was still standing where he had been when he spoke to Dustfinger, staring down the road. His grandchildren were pulling at him and talking to him, but he didn't seem to notice them. What exactly do you want to discuss with him? Mo sat on the steps in front of the memorial and made Maggie sit down beside him. Do you see those names? He asked, pointing at the chiseled letters listing people no longer alive. There's a family behind every name. A mother or father, brothers and sisters, perhaps a wife. If one of them were to find out that letters can be brought to life, that someone who's only to name now could become flesh and blood again, don't you think he or she should do anything at all? Would do anything at all to make it happen? Maggie looked at the long list. Someone had painted a heart next to the name at the top, and there was a bunch of dried flowers on the stone steps in front of the memorial. No one can bring back the dead, Maggie. Mo went on. Perhaps it's true that death is only the beginning of a new story, but no one has ever read the book in which it's written, and the writer of that book certainly doesn't live in the little village on the coast playing football with his grandchildren. Your mother's name isn't on the stone like this, but hidden somewhere in a book, and I have had idea that just might make it possible to alter what happened 9 years ago. You're going back? No, I'm not. I gave you my word. Have I ever broken it? Maggie shook her head. You broke your word to Dustfinger, she thought, but she didn't say it out loud. There you are, then, said Mo. I want to talk to Fenagolo. That's the only reason why I want to stay. Maggie looked at the sea. Then the sun had broken through the clouds, and all of a sudden the water was glistening and shining as if someone had poured paint into it. It's not far from here, she murmured. What is it? Capricorn's village. Mo looked eastward. Yes, it's odd that he felt drawn here, of all places, don't you think? As if we were looking for somewhere resembling the countryside of his own story. Suppose he finds us. Nonsense. Do you know how many villages there are along this coast? Maggie shrugged her shoulders. He found you before, even when you were far, far away. You found me with Dustfinger's help, and you can be sure Dustfinger isn't going to help him again. Mo rose and drew Maggie to her feet. Come on, let's ask Fenagolo where he can stay the night. He looked like he could use some company. Fenagolo did not take them whether Dustfinger looked like he had imagined him. He said very little as they walked back to his house, but when Mo told him that he and Maggie would like to stay there another day, his face brightened slightly. He even offered them a place to spend the night, an apartment he sometimes rented out to tourists. Mo gratefully accepted. He and the old man talked far into the evening, while Fenagolo's grandchildren chased Maggie all over the nooks and crannies of the house. The two men sat in Fenagolo's study. It was next to the kitchen, and Maggie kept trying to listen at the closed door. But Pippo and Rico always caught her in the act, and dragged her away to the next flight of stairs before she could hear one more than a few words. Finally she gave it up. She let Paula show her the kittens scampering around with their mother in the tiny garden round the house, and followed the three children to the house where they lived with their parents. They didn't stay long, just long enough to persuade their mother to let them stay at their grandfather's for supper. Supper was pasta with sausage. Pippo and Rico picked the bitter-tasting greens bits out of their sauce with disgusted expressions on their faces, but Maggie and Paula enjoyed the flavor of leaves. After the meal, Mo and Fenagolo drank a whole bottle of red wine between them, and when the old man finally saw Mo and Maggie to the door, he said good night and added, "So you'll look at my book, as we agreed, Mortimer, and I'll get down to work first thing tomorrow." "What kind of work, Mo?" asked Maggie as they walked along the dimly lit alleys together. Night had hardly cooled the air at all. A strange foreign wind blew through the village, hot and sandy, as if they were carrying the desert itself across the sea. "I'd rather you didn't ask me that," said Mo. "Let's just act as if we're on holiday for a few days. This looks like a great place for a holiday, don't you think?" Maggie answered only with a nod. Mo really knew her very well. He could often tell what she was thinking before she put it into words, but he sometimes forgot she wasn't 5 years old anymore, and these days it took more than a few kind words to distract her from her worries. "Very well," she thought as she silently followed Mo through the sleeping village. "If he doesn't want to talk to me what Fenagolo's supposed to do for him, I'll ask old Turtleface himself. And if he won't say either, then one of his grandchildren can find out for me." Paula was just the right size for a spy. It didn't seem all long ago since Maggie herself had been able to hide unnoticed under a table. That is chapter 27. Now for chapter 28. Chapter 28. Going home. It was almost midnight by the time Eleanor finally saw her garden gates beside the road. The lights down to the bank of the lake stood side by side, with the carving of glowworms trembling as they were reflected in the black water. It was good to be home again. Even the wind that blew in Eleanor's face as she got out to open the gate that felt familiar. It was all familiar. The scent of the hedges, and the earth and the air, so much cooler and moister than in the south. It didn't taste all of salt any more either. I might even miss that saltiness, thought Eleanor. The sea always filled her with longing thought, though for what she was never sure. The iron gate creaked quietly as she pushed it open, almost as if they were welcoming her home. But no other voices would greet her. "What a silly notion, Eleanor," she muttered, as she got out back into the car. "Your books will welcome you home. That's good enough, surely." She had been in a strange mood even during the drive. She had taken her time on the way home, avoiding major roads, and had spent the night in a tiny place in the mountains, the name of which she had already forgotten. She had enjoyed being home alone again, for that, after all, was what she was used to. Yet the silence in her car had suddenly begun to trouble her, and she had got into a cafe in a sleepy little town that didn't even have a bookshop, just to hear other humans' voices. She had spent much time there, staying only long enough to gulp down a cup of coffee because she was annoyed with herself. "What's all this about, Eleanor?" she had muttered when she was back in the car. "Since when do you long for human company? High time you were home again before you go right around the bend." Her house looked so dark and deserted as she drove up to it that it seemed curiously strange to her. Only the sense of her gardens made her feel a little better as she went up the steps to the front door. The lights over the door, which usually came on automatically at night, wasn't working, and it took Eleanor's a ridiculous amount of time to get her keys into the lock. As she pushed open the door and stumbled into a pitch-dark hallway, she quietly cursed the man who usually kept an eye on the house and the garden whenever she went away. She had tried phoning him 3 times, but she supposed he'd gone to see his daughter again. Didn't anyone realize what treasures this house contained? Of course, if they'd been made of gold, but they considered only of paper and printed ink. It was very quiet, and for a moment Eleanor thought she heard Mortimer's voice as if brought life into the church with the red walls. She could have listened to him for 100 years. No, 200 years at least. I must get him to read aloud to me when he arrives, she murmured, taking the shoes off her tired feet. There must be some books he can read safely. Why had she never before noticed how quiet her house could be? It was silent as the grave, and the pleasure Eleanor had expected to feel as soon as she was back with her own fuller walls was slow in coming. "Hello, here I am again," she cried into the silence as she felt along the walls for the light switch. "Now you shall all be dusted and tidied again, my dears." The ceiling light came on, very bright, and as Eleanor stumbled back in alarm, she fell over her own handbag, which she had put down on the floor. "Oh, heavens!" she whispered, getting to her feet again. "Oh, dear heavens! Oh, no!" The custom-made bookshelves were empty. The books that had stood on them so safely, spine beside spine, now lay in an untidied heap on the floor, crumpled, dirty, and trampled underfoot, as if heavy boots had been performing a wild dance on them. Eleanor began to tremble all over. She stumbled through her discarded treasures as if she were wading through a muddy pond, pushing them aside, picking up one and let it drop, staggering on down the long corridor that led to her library. The corridor was no better. Great disorderly piles of books were heaped so high that Eleanor could hardly make her way through the ruins. At last she reached the library door. It had not been locked. Eleanor stood there for an entire eternity, weak at the knees, before she finally dared to open it. Her library was empty. Not a book in sight, not a single book. Not only the shelves were beneath the broken glass of the display cases. There wasn't a book on the floor either. They were all gone. Instead, a red rooster dangling from the ceiling stone's head. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. The rooster's head was hanging down, its red comb flopping over its staring eyes. Its plumaging was still ghostly, as if all the life in it had fled there, into the fine roseate breast feathers, the darkly patterned wings, and the long deep green tail feathers that shimmered like silk. One of the windows was open. A black arrow had been drawn in soot on the white paint of the windowsill, and pointed the way to the garden outside. Eleanor staggered toward the window, numbed with fear. The night was not dark enough to hide what lay on the lawn outside, a sharpness mound of ash, pale gray in the moonlight, gray as as moth wings, gray as burnt paper. There they were, her most valuable books, or all the what was left of them. Eleanor knelt down on the floorboards, on the wood she had so carefully chosen. The wind wafted in through the open window and over her. The familiar wind, and it smelled almost like the air in the Capricorn church. Eleanor wanted to scream. She wanted to curse, rage, cry out in fury, but not a sound came out of her mouth. All she could do was weep. Oh no. That's the end of chapter 28 and 27. And stay tuned for chapter 29. That will come tomorrow. Please subscribe, comment, and like. Don't forget to turn on a notifications bell to be notified when I upload another video. And don't forget to dare to dream, guys. Bye.